Hey guys, tonight we begin not with lace and lullabies, but with torches, parchment, and sharpened stakes. This isn't the story of princesses waiting in towers. It's the story of women who asked questions and paid for it. Before the fairy tales came the firewood. Before the crowns came the cuffs. You've heard about witches, but no one told you they were often just women who read too much, thought too fast, or said the wrong thing with the right tone. Welcome back to a time where silence was survival, and intelligence was the most dangerous sin. So before you get too cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You're born into straw, into steam, into the smell of sweat-soaked linen and iron blood. The midwife mutters a prayer under her breath as she wraps your shivering body in cloth stiff from too many births and too few washings. Outside, the wind is howling. Inside, the air is thick with fear. Not fear of death, but of disappointment. You are not a son. Your mother barely looks at you. Her eyes are glazed from the effort, from the pain, from the realization that she must now raise a daughter in a world that doesn't want one. A daughter means risk, dowries, shame, labor without land, a mouth to feed, and no sword to swing. You grow, slowly, quietly. Your first toy is a wooden spoon. Your second is responsibility. By the age of 5, you're stirring porridge over a fire that spits at your hands. By 6, you've learned to move silently through a room, to anticipate what the men will need before they grunt it aloud. You're not praised for cleverness, you're praised for obedience, for knowing your place. But even then, your mind wanders. You notice things. The way the priest's lips curl when your mother kneels. The way your father's face tightens when you ask too many questions. The way your brother gets answers while you get silence. You're told to be quiet, not with words, but with looks. The long, lingering kind that suck the air from your lungs and say, "How dare you?" One day, you ask why the moon disappears. Your aunt drops a bowl. The room goes still. She says the devil likes curious girls. That questions lead to sin, and sin leads to flames. You don't ask again, not out loud, but the questions stack inside you like kindling. You're told Eve was the first sinner, that she listened to a snake, wanted to know too much, and doomed us all. You wonder, if ignorance was so holy, why did God put the tree there in the first place? You don't say it. Your world is ruled by men in robes who claim to speak for God. They tell you what's sacred, what's shameful, what's punishable by death. They say your soul is precious, but your body is a snare. You learn to walk without swinging your hips. You learn to smile without showing teeth. You learn to take up as little space as possible. In conversation, in the room, in your own skin. Still, your mind resists. You remember the first time you touched parchment. It was rough, yellowed, tucked under a pile of rags in the chapel's corner. Letters danced across it like ants. You didn't know what they said, only that they meant something. More than any sermon ever had. You asked the monk what it was. He snatched it away like it had burned you both. "A girl has no use for letters," he snapped. "You want to read? Read the Psalms, out loud, and only in Latin." You didn't know Latin. That was the point. So you started listening, to the way syllables curved in the priest's throat, to the rhythm of prayers and the shape of scripture. You didn't need to read to understand the game. You only needed to observe. And that's what made you dangerous. By the time you're 10, you've learned that the sharpest minds bleed quiet. That clever girls must bury their brilliance under layers of ash and apron. You play dumb. You ask your questions to the goats in the yard. You memorize patterns in the stars instead of the psalms. You know that if you ever let the full weight of your thoughts rise to the surface, they'll tie stones to your feet and call it justice. You are not special. You're not the only girl who sees. But the ones who don't silence themselves, they disappear. The herbalist who spoke too boldly. The widow who knew too much. The girl who dreamed of a world without husbands. All gone. Called witches. Called mad. Called trouble. So you survive. You sharpen your mind behind your eyes, not your lips. You study without books, debate without words, invent without tools. You learn to find knowledge in nature, in silence, in the way people lie when they speak too confidently. One night, you hear your father say to your mother that girls shouldn't think so much. It makes them difficult to marry off, he mutters, like he's talking about livestock. Your mother doesn't disagree. She just nods, like agreeing keeps the peace. And maybe it does. You wonder how many thoughts she buried to keep herself alive. You decide you won't marry, not if it means muting your mind forever. But that too must stay silent. A girl who wants freedom is a girl who vanishes. So you wait. And while you wait, you think. You watch. You collect the scraps of the world no one else sees. The hush behind the altar, the contradiction in the priest's eyes, the falcon that returns to its perch, each dusk like it's whispering something to the wind. You are not a sorceress, not a queen, not a legend, just a clever girl in a cruel time, and that is already enough to terrify them. They won't burn you yet, but they will watch. Every move, every word. Because deep down, they know what you are. And worse, they know what you could become. It starts with a scrap, a torn corner of parchment tucked into the corner of a basket of onions. You don't know where it came from. Maybe it was used to wrap fish, or stuffed between cracks in the wall to block the wind. But it's there, folded, soft, stained with time. And on it, black marks dance across the surface, like ants marching in lines. They aren't pictures, they aren't symbols. They're letters, words, sentences, something written, something meant. You don't know what it says, but you know it means something. Your fingers tremble as you trace the curves. Your lips move, trying to mimic the shape of the strokes. You hold it like it's hot, like it might ignite and burn a hole straight through your hand. Because something in your chest tells you, this is not for you. You hide it, not because you're ashamed, but because you've seen what happens to women who notice too much. The last time the priest caught a girl in the village with a letter from her brother, just a letter, he demanded it be burned, called it temptation ink, said women's minds are gardens for serpents, and writing is the hiss that curls through the grass. You were 8 when you first heard the word heretic. You didn't know what it meant, just that it was always said in a whisper, like sin you couldn't see, like smoke that came before fire. Someone accused Sister Magdalene of it, a nun who'd been teaching a girl how to write her own name. They sent her away. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe she's still here, under the stones behind the chapel. You don't ask. So now, you read in secret. Or rather, you learn to read in secret, because no one has taught you. There are no primers, no slates, just the torn page and a relentless, aching hunger that won't stop gnawing until you understand. You start watching the boys at their lessons. You listen when the monk mumbles prayers from the Book of Hours. You memorize the shapes on the altar cloth. When the baker's son brags about reading a passage, you pretend not to hear. But your mind traps the sounds like a fly in honey. You gather words the way poor women gather herbs, quietly, in the margins. Your brother calls you strange, says girls aren't meant to think so hard. Your mother says books are for priests. That reading fills a girl's head with ideas. And ideas are a luxury only men can afford. You don't answer. You just nod. And then, when no one's looking, you sneak behind the chapel again, to the wall where the plaster has peeled and the carved Latin beneath still clings to the stone like a secret. You trace the letters. Whisper them to yourself. Try to fit meaning to sound. It doesn't matter if you're right. You feel right. And that's more dangerous than being correct. Because this isn't just a game, it's an offense. A girl with a book is a threat. She isn't docile. She isn't ornamental. She isn't afraid of the silence men work so hard to keep around them. She asks questions. Not the soft kind, but the sharp ones. And in a world built from obedience, questions are hammers. One day, the parchment is gone. You check the basket, the floor, the crack in the wall. Nothing. It's vanished. And for a moment, it feels like someone's yanked the air out of your lungs. That scrap was yours. A lifeline. A secret window into something vast and untouchable. And now, it's dust. Later that day, the priest preaches about Eve again. About women who reach for things that weren't meant for them. About punishments earned with curiosity. He doesn't look at you. Not directly. But his words do. They crawl under your skin like centipedes. And you sit there still, while your heart pounds like a fist against a locked door. You learn to stop reacting. You blink when you're supposed to. Bow when they pray. Smile when they joke about clever wives being the worst kind of burden. You do it so well that they stop watching. They forget you notice. Which is perfect. Because now you can steal more. Not pages, but glimpses. You catch sight of a ledger at the market. You help the miller's wife count grain and ask, innocently, what each letter means on the chalkboard. You copy the shapes onto your skin with charcoal when no one's looking. Your arms are inked with stolen knowledge by sunset, scrubbed clean by dawn. It's never enough, but it's something. And something is dangerous. A boy catches you once. The cooper's son. He sees you mouthing letters by the well and sneers. You think you're a priest? He spits. Girls can't read. Everyone knows that. You're probably cursed. You laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it buys you time. You say you were pretending, making up songs. He laughs too. Says you're strange, but harmless. You aren't harmless, but he doesn't need to know that. That night, you cry. Not because you're afraid, but because you're angry. At the world that said letters belong to men, at the church that made ignorance holy, at the ink that made your heart sing, and your life more fragile. You don't stop. You can't. Because even if they burn every book, tear every page, and carve obedience into your spine, they can't take what's already inside you. The alphabet blooms behind your eyes now. Sentences form in your dreams. And somewhere, deep down, you know, this is power. And that's why they fear it. Because a woman with words is a woman with weapons. And someday, you'll use them. There's a bell that rings every morning before the sun rises. It doesn't ask for your attention. It demands it. Low and heavy, it drags across the fields like a chain, waking up the sheep, the sinners, and everyone in between. You stir in your straw bed, cold to the bone, and remember what day it is. All of them. Every day is God's day. Every hour is His hour. Every thought, they say, is supposed to bend in His direction. And if it doesn't, well, that's not just wrong. That's damnable. You go to Mass. You kneel on aching joints beside your mother. You listen as the priest stands at the altar, draped in gold, his voice echoing in a language you're not allowed to understand. Latin. Sacred, sealed, off limits. It rolls over the congregation like smoke. Beautiful, incomprehensible, and meant to stay that way. You're not here to understand. You're here to obey. The priest tells you what the scripture means, what God wants, what you must do to avoid hell, even though you're probably still headed there. You're female after all, and Eve ate the fruit first. It's not a sermon. It's a verdict. You're told your thoughts are not your own, that your mind is a battleground. And Satan loves women who think that the devil doesn't need to possess you. He just needs to whisper a question. That's all it takes. One moment of doubt, one breath of curiosity, one flicker of, but what if? And suddenly you're a heretic. So you don't question, not out loud. You nod when they speak. You pray when they say. You swallow your thoughts before they reach your tongue. Because the church isn't just where you go on Sundays. It's everywhere. It's your calendar, your clock, your courthouse, your school, your silence. The priest isn't just a man in robes. He is the voice of God, the gatekeeper to your soul, the only one allowed to say what's true and what's evil. You're not allowed to confess an opinion. You're allowed to confess sin. And sin, as it turns out, includes everything from missing morning prayers to wondering why men get to drink from chalices while women clean them. You're told God is love, but also vengeance, mercy, but also wrath. You're told to be meek like Mary, silent like saints, grateful like the ones who were burned alive for believing correctly. You're told that suffering is holy and that women are particularly suited for it, which is convenient, given how often it finds you. You ask, once, why Eve was punished for wanting to know, why knowledge was the first sin. The room goes still. Your aunt calls you blasphemous. Your mother slaps your cheek before the priest has to. You learn your lesson. You keep your thoughts hidden, like bruises. You see it happen to others. A woman with herbs who heals a fever too quickly. Suddenly she's unnatural. A boy who says he saw a vision. Suddenly he's a prophet. Until he isn't. Then he's possessed. A monk with a limp who writes too much poetry is sent away because feeling too deeply is dangerous unless it's about God. And God, apparently, only listens to men. You start to feel the divide, not between right and wrong, but between what is permitted and what is true. You feel it in your bones when the priest says women must be silent in the assembly, but then asks your mother to organize the harvest prayer. You feel it when the bishop preaches about purity, while his bastard daughter sweeps the chapel stairs. You feel it when they call questions a sin, but curiosity keeps you up at night, burning, clawing, screaming inside your skull. They say the church is a refuge, but it feels more like a mirror, the kind that only reflects the version of you they want to see, docile, pious, dumb. You hear stories of women in other towns, women who taught other women to read, women who translated verses in secret, women who asked too many questions and wound up on trial. The word heretic echoes like thunder. You don't know exactly what it means, but you know what it does. It silences, it brands, it burns. Sometimes you wonder if the priest believes any of it. Sometimes you watch his eyes flicker when he says the world is flat and that angels patrol the clouds with spears. He says it like it's true, like he's dared himself to believe it. You never see him doubt aloud. He doesn't have to, because when you doubt, it's a crime. So you split yourself in two, the outside you, the obedient daughter, the silent listener, the bowed head in the pew, and the inside you, the one who watches everything, questions everything, memorizes every contradiction like a survival map. Your thoughts are your last possession, and even those aren't safe, because the church has a long memory and a short fuse, and it's always listening, through your neighbors, through your father, through the confessional, through the eyes of the statue of the Virgin, whose smile seems more like a warning than a comfort. You start to understand that faith in this place is less about God and more about control. And control loves a quiet girl. It loves a girl who doesn't write, doesn't speak, doesn't ask why God would make you curious and then punish you for it. You are not a nun. You are not a priest. You are not allowed to interpret. You are not allowed to know. You are not allowed to think unless your thoughts come wrapped in scripture and stamped by a man in velvet robes. You are a soul on a leash. And if it ever slips, if your mind ever slips, if one forbidden thought escapes your lips and lands in the wrong ear, they won't argue with you. They'll accuse you, and your curiosity will become your crime. You wake up one morning and something has changed. Not in the air, not in the sky, in you. Your chest aches, your hips feel foreign, your blood comes, slowly at first, then not. And suddenly, you are no longer a child. You're a commodity. No one tells you this outright. They don't need to. The stairs do it for them. The way your uncle lingers too long when you bend over to pick up a dropped rag. The way the boys at the well stop laughing and start elbowing each other when you walk past. The way your mother eyes your growing chest like it's an enemy camp approaching. She doesn't smile. She sighs. You're becoming a woman, she says. But it doesn't feel like becoming. It feels like erasing. Your body becomes a battlefield. Not of violence, yet, but of ownership. Everyone suddenly has a stake in you. Your breasts aren't yours. They're a scandal waiting to happen. Your hips aren't yours. They're proof that your womb works. Your mouth isn't yours. It's something to be quiet or to fill with obedience. Your thoughts, they stop asking about stars and scripture. Now they just ask, when did I stop belonging to myself? The answer is sometime between the blood and the whispers. Your father starts walking with you to the market again. Not because he cares, because he notices who else is watching. He calls it protection, but it feels more like surveillance. He walks 5 steps behind, like a shepherd guarding a sheep, or a merchant protecting his wares. You hear your name said more often, but never to your face. It floats through doorways, around corners. She's blooming, they say. She'll make a fine wife. She looks like her mother did. God help us. You're told to dress modestly, to lower your gaze, to be sweet, but not too sweet, kind, but not too kind. Don't lead boys on, your mother hisses one morning, as if you're capable of seduction just by existing, as if your body is a trap you set on purpose. You try to hide it, bind your chest, stay indoors, speak less, smile less. But it doesn't matter. You could dress in rags and ash and still be told you're inviting the devil in with your walk. Because this has nothing to do with you. It's about them, about control. And your body? It's just the battlefield where their fears and desires meet. One afternoon, your father comes home early. Your mother starts baking without explanation. Your sister scrubs the table even though it's already clean. You don't ask. You just stand still, waiting. Then the knock. Heavy, deliberate. The suitor is twice your age. His beard is gray. His breath smells like boiled onions and cheap wine. He doesn't look at your face. He looks at your hands, your waist, your feet. Like you're a loaf of bread he's inspecting for cracks. He speaks only to your father. Livestock is mentioned. A goat, perhaps 2. A plot of land near the river. Not because you're beautiful, not because you're kind, but because your body is ready. And that means it's time to trade. You are not introduced. You are appraised. Later that night, your mother calls you into the other room. She doesn't ask how you feel. She doesn't even ask if you're afraid. She just says, he's got land. You'll eat. That's the whole blessing. You'll eat. The deal is struck 3 days later. You are not asked to say yes. Only to wear the dress. To keep your voice small. To serve wine to the man who now owns your womb. You try to smile. You try not to vomit. He calls you girl, even after the wedding. You are married before you understand what marriage is. You learn fast. On the wedding night, your thoughts flee your body like frightened birds. You lie still and silent and stare at the ceiling while he grunts over you, calling it love. It isn't. It's proof of purchase. Afterward, there's blood on the sheets. Your mother collects them, shows the neighbors, confirms your purity like a merchant, showing a buyer the tag. She was untouched, they say, as if that's the greatest virtue you'll ever have, that your body belonged to no man, until now. Now it belongs to him. Your husband says you're lucky, that he's kind, that he could have chosen a girl with broader hips or a bigger dowry, that he's generous for accepting you as you are. You thank him, because you've been taught to. You bleed again the next month, and the next. And when you don't, the midwife comes. You're pregnant, just like that. No questions, no time, just more proof that your body is not yours. It is a vessel, a passage, a function. You carry a child you didn't ask for inside a body you barely recognize, in a world that won't listen to your pain unless it stops the harvest. Your belly swells, your feet ache. You still cook, clean, kneel, obey. And when the baby comes, the pain is blinding, ripping. Holy, they say. Holy because it hurts. Holy because you're silent. Holy because now you've fulfilled your role. You've made a life without ever living yours. They hand you the baby, a girl. The first thing they say? Pity. You hold her close. Her eyes are wide. She doesn't know yet. She doesn't understand what she's been born into. That her thoughts will be measured, her body watched, her worth calculated in goats and grain and blood on linen. You look at her and wonder, how do I protect you from what they've already decided you are? There is no answer. Only silence. And a scream you don't let out. You're 15 when they tell you it's time. There's no celebration, no music, no moment where you get to say no. Just a brisk announcement over stale bread and boiled cabbage. Your wedding is next month. The man's name is Willem. He's 33, owns a cart, lost his first wife in childbirth. You are not her, but you will be expected to do everything she did, only quieter. They say marriage is a blessing, that it gives a girl purpose, that it settles her, but what they mean is this: it silences her, because marriage isn't about love. It's not about laughter or partnership or even companionship. It's about property, his property, and your body, your work, your voice. Those are now part of the estate. On your wedding day, they lace you into a dress that doesn't fit. You haven't eaten properly in a week. Your stomach is in knots. Your hands shake. Your mother tightens the bodice so hard, you see stars. Stand up straight, she hisses. Don't fidget. Look grateful. You try. You really do. But when Willem lifts your veil and kisses you, dry lips, unblinking eyes, it doesn't feel like a promise. It feels like a contract being signed with skin. That night, he doesn't ask. He takes. He grunts. He rolls off you and snores. You stare at the ceiling and feel your mind folding itself into smaller and smaller corners. In the morning, he wants eggs, then bread, then you, again. And so it begins. Marriage is not a partnership. It's a performance. You smile when you don't want to. You nod when you disagree. You laugh when you'd rather scream. Every thought is filtered through survival. Every opinion measured against the weight of his moods. Willem doesn't like women who talk too much, or too fast, or with too many ideas. He likes his soup hot, his shirts clean, and his wife quiet. He reminds you of this often, usually with words, sometimes with silence, once with the back of his hand. He doesn't hit hard, just enough to remind you. Afterward, he apologizes, says he's under stress, says you shouldn't have embarrassed him in front of the blacksmith. All you did was suggest a better way to balance the cart load. You thought it might help. You were wrong. You learn fast. You stop offering suggestions. You stop reading when he's home. You start saying, "Yes, Willem, Even when you want to say, "You are wrong and I know it, and you know I know it," you swallow it. All of it. Every sharp thought, every clever answer, every observation that used to make your mother roll her eyes and your sister laugh. Because now, those same thoughts could cost you. Marriage is your job now, but unlike other jobs, this one has no hours, no rest days, no praise. You work from before sunrise until the stars blink on. You scrub floors, churn butter, sew hems, lift buckets, change linens, mend socks, and kneel, constantly kneel, in prayer and in service. Your reward? Not being beaten, not being abandoned, not being accused of being difficult. You once dreamed of learning more, of writing your name without hiding it, of asking questions that didn't get you punished. Now your dreams are smaller. Sleep uninterrupted, a dinner without shouting, a day without fear. You begin to envy the stupid, not the truly unthinking, but the ones who never asked for more. The ones who married at 12, bore 10 children, died at 32, and never once tried to read a ledger upside down or understand why the moon bleeds red in summer. Their ignorance is armor. Yours is a lie. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between chores, you let your thoughts escape. Not for long, just a flicker, a sentence, an idea, a joke you can't say aloud, a memory of something you once read or imagined reading. And just like that, your mind returns to you for a breath or two. It's dangerous. It's forbidden. But it's yours. Until it isn't. Willem finds one of your scribbled pages once. Just marks. Letters, really. You were practicing. Secretly. Quietly. He holds it up like evidence. Asks what it is. You stammer. He doesn't wait for an answer. This time, he doesn't use his hand. He uses words. Cuts deeper. Trying to be better than me, he spits. Trying to be something you're not? You think you're smart? What good is a smart wife if she can't keep her mouth shut? You apologize. Not because you mean it, but because it's the safest word you know. After that, you stop writing. You speak less. You walk with smaller steps. You master the art of invisibility, being present without presence. The only time your opinion is wanted is when he asks, "Is it ready?" And, "Is it warm?" And, "Did you bleed again this month?" Your womb is now a task. Your silence, a virtue. Your intellect, a liability. But here's the thing no one tells men like Willem. Minds don't die just because they're ignored. They retreat. They coil. They bide their time. And one day, you'll tell the truth again. Maybe not with words. Maybe with choices. With a whisper to your daughter. With a look. With a refusal to pass down the same quiet death you were handed. Because your mind never stopped working. It just learned to work in shadows. And someday, it'll find the light again. The kitchen is dark before dawn. Damp stones, dead fire. The air smells like last night's stew and wet ash. You move barefoot over the cold floor, feeling for the coals with your fingertips, praying there's still enough warmth to wake them. If not, you'll start again from nothing. Again, like always. Your breath clouds in front of you. Outside, the cock crows. Inside, you begin your shift. Not paid, not chosen, not even spoken aloud. Just assumed. Like gravity. Like silence. Like the expectation that you, a woman, will serve, feed, clean, and disappear. Preferably all before the sun is up. You used to imagine waking up to ideas, to books, to words, to the sound of conversation about things that mattered, stars, maps, thought. But in this world, your mornings begin not with inspiration, but with kneading, chopping, measuring grain with a cracked spoon, while your children cry and your husband yells that he's still hungry. You're not asked how you slept. You're asked why breakfast isn't done yet. The kitchen isn't a room. It's a sentence, passed down through mothers and aunts like a curse wrapped in duty. You were told it's your domain, that the hearth is sacred, that fire is woman's power. But no one talks about how it burns you alive slowly, every day, without ever leaving a visible scar. There's no reward for doing it right. No applause for perfectly sliced onions. No feast held in your honor for not burning the bread. But get it wrong, slightly wrong, and it's your fault. The bread's too tough? You didn't rise early enough? The stew is thin? You're careless? You're distracted? You're lazy? It's never the meat that was spoiled, the tools that were broken, the weather that ruined the wheat. It's always you. And if it's not the meal they find fault in, it's your attitude. You're too quiet, too sharp, too tired looking. Your apron's stained. Your eyes are puffy. You look like a woman who thinks, and that alone is enough to ruin the broth. They say a good wife brings warmth to the home, but no one tells you what it costs to keep the fire burning when you're made of wood. You hum to yourself while you cook, not because you're happy, but because if you don't fill the silence, the thoughts come, and the thoughts are dangerous. You think about the girl you were, the questions you asked, the dreams you had. You think about the stories that never made it into books because they were whispered by women over soup pots and scrub buckets. You think about escape, not in the literal sense, just the kind that lets you breathe. You stir the pot clockwise, just like your mother taught you, just like her mother taught her. No one knows why. It's just tradition. And tradition is sacred here. Sacred means unchallenged. Unchallenged means you're not allowed to ask why clockwise matters more than the burning in your wrists or the way your mind drifts toward forbidden things, like how to measure distance using stars, or how to boil ink from oak galls, or how some recipes are spells and some spells are just recipes with the wrong name. But you keep stirring. The baby cries. You rock the cradle with one foot while feeding the fire with your hands. You taste the stew, needs salt, but you don't have any. He sold it to buy ale. So you mash in a turnip and hope no one notices. Someone always notices. Later, your husband comes in, doesn't speak, just sits, sighs, scratches. You place the bowl in front of him like an offering. He doesn't say thank you. He eats, slurps, grunts. The stew is bland. He says it out loud. You apologize. He says a woman's only job is to feed her family. Then he drinks until he can't stand. Then he sleeps. You clean up. Alone. Again. You scrape the bowls. Stack the wood. Soak the pots. Your back aches. Your shoulders burn. You could scream, but it would only wake the children. So you swallow the scream and replace it with a lullaby. The kitchen is supposed to be your throne, they say, but it feels more like a gallows. You think about how much has passed through your hands. Flour, blood, fever, life, death, and none of it has earned you respect. Not in this house, not in this village, not even from yourself, some days, because you start to believe them, that your worth lives in the softness of bread crusts and the way your broth coats the tongue. You start to shrink inside. You forget the sound of your own mind, unguarded, until one day, something small breaks. You're shelling peas and overhear the merchant's wife say her son's learning Latin. Just like that, her son, half your age, already learning to shape the world with words you were never allowed to see. You look down at your hands, wrinkled, burned, capable of bringing forth life and feeding a family through plague, famine, and war, and yet somehow still not worthy of a pen. You keep shelling, but something inside you refuses to go back to sleep. Later that night, you take the dull end of a knife and scratch a letter into the wooden table. Just one. A single curve of stolen defiance. Not enough to change the world. just enough to remember you're still in it. You wipe it away before dawn, but you remember it. And for the first time in years, the kitchen feels a little less like a cage, and a little more like a door. You say one thing, not loud, not rude, just a thought, a comment, while kneading bread, soft and casual, like steam rising from a pot. I don't think God meant for us to be so afraid of him. And that's it. That's the moment the room changes. The other women glance down. One mutters something about the weather. Another suddenly remembers she left laundry on the line. No one looks you in the eye. Because it's not a thought now. It's gossip. And gossip, for women, is a sin with a heartbeat. You didn't mean anything by it. It wasn't even a complaint. You were just thinking out loud. The way your husband does when he paces the house, spouting nonsense about the harvest, the taxes, the bishop's new cloak. He does it all the time. Calls it reasoning, calls it managing, calls it being a man. But you're not reasoning. You're chattering, meddling, making trouble. By evening, 3 households have heard the story. By morning, it has changed. You didn't question God, you challenged him. You didn't wonder if fear was necessary. You mocked the scriptures. By noon, someone's cousin's sister-in-law is saying she always knew you were strange. Said your eyes looked too sharp for a woman. Said your bread always rose too perfectly, as if you'd made a deal with something. That's how it happens. Not all at once, but slowly, like smoke under a door. You're not accused of anything. Not formally. Not yet. But now you're being watched. Closely. The priest lingers a little longer after Mass. The baker's wife stops inviting you to knead beside her. Even your own mother tells you to be careful. Not kind, not sympathetic, just careful. As if your mouth is a blade, and you're walking barefoot across your own tongue. You didn't spread rumors. You didn't lie. You didn't whisper about your neighbor's debts or the tanner's daughter's belly. You simply spoke. And in this village, a woman with a thought is a threat. A woman who shares a thought? That's arson. You remember being a girl, how the grown women used to talk when they thought no one could hear, in kitchens, in fields, behind the curtain during Mass. Their voices hushed, but alive. They talked about husbands who drank too much, about pregnancies that went wrong, about how the priest's sermon didn't quite match the scripture, about how the stars seemed closer after childbirth. It wasn't gossip. Not really. It was survival. Information passed, like a flame in winter, warming, warning, never meant to spread too far. But the men called it gossip, because naming it that made it easy to dismiss, made the women who did it seem petty, silly, small. You see it now, how a man can say the crops are failing because of God's wrath and be praised for his spiritual insight. How a man can accuse the midwife of witchcraft and be thanked for his bravery. How a man can say the river smells strange and suddenly the council wants to reroute the town's drainage system. But you say the same thing, and it's venom. It's vanity. It's scandal. A man speaks truth. A woman whispers blasphemy. You try to stop. You really do. You bite your tongue. You nod. You agree. You smile at things that aren't funny, and keep your thoughts tucked tight behind your teeth. But your mind keeps moving, like fire under ash, like a storm behind a locked window. And one day, it slips again. Someone mentions the price of salt rising. You say, "Funny how it only happened after the bishop's cart left with 3 barrels." Just a joke. Just a flicker of truth wrapped in sugar. And once again, the room goes still. You've done it again. The worst part isn't the whispers. It's how careful you become. How you start editing yourself mid-sentence. How you rehearse even your greetings before entering a room. How you apologize before you speak, and apologize again after, just in case. They make you doubt your own voice. You stop telling stories. You stop asking questions. You stop laughing too loudly. Because gossip, they say, is how the devil enters a woman. Through her mouth. Through her curiosity. Through the small space between what she sees and what she says about it. So you shrink. Not because you're guilty, but because you're smart enough to know the cost of being heard. Until one day, you overhear two men in the market, talking about the taxes. The miller says the baron is stealing from the grain. The cobbler agrees. They laugh. Loud. Their words echo across the square. People nod. No one accuses them of gossip. No one questions their virtue. You stand there, holding a basket of turnips, and wonder what it's like to speak without consequence. To name the truth and not be named in return. But you don't say anything. Not out loud. Because in this world, if a woman notices too much, she's dangerous. And if she says it, even once, she's poison. So you burn quietly, and they call it grace. She lives at the edge of the village. Always has. A crooked little cottage, nestled behind thorny hedgerows, walls covered in moss, thick enough to hold the weight of secrets. You're told not to go there. That she's strange. That her hands are stained. That her words don't end in amen. You go anyway. You go because your sister won't stop bleeding. Because the priest only offers prayers, not poultices. Because the healer sees you without asking who your father is. Because she touches your sister's forehead and doesn't flinch at the fever. Because when she mixes the herbs, she sings. Not in Latin, not in fear, just in rhythm. She gives your sister a tea that smells like bark and rot and the soft green edge of something wild. And it works. The blood stops. The color returns. Your sister sleeps. And for the first time in days, so do you. You bring the healer bread the next morning. She smiles, but doesn't thank you. Instead, she places a sprig of something bitter in your palm. For cramps, she says. Then adds, boil it with wine, not water. You want to ask what it is. You want to ask everything. So you do. And she answers. You begin to visit more often. Always careful. Always quiet. You learn the names of plants, the uses of roots, the difference between a fever that will break and one that won't. She teaches you how to set a bone, how to whisper to a laboring woman, how to stitch a wound with thread boiled in honey. She teaches you where the pain hides when a man drinks too much, and how to tell when a child is beyond saving. You listen with everything, because this is knowledge with weight. Knowledge that hums in your hands and burns in your blood. Knowledge passed from woman to woman, not written, not sanctioned, not safe. The church doesn't like her. They don't say it outright, not yet, but they call her unnatural. They say she meddles in mysteries that belong to God. They say her herbs smell too strong, that her prayers don't sound like prayers, that her cures work too well to be holy. They never accuse her when a baby lives, only when one dies. You see it happen once. A mother, too young, too scared, too broken. The baby is stillborn. The father blames the midwife. The priest agrees. She must have done something wrong. She must have let the devil in. There's a meeting. Words are shouted. No proof is offered. But proof isn't needed when the people are already afraid. They stop bringing her offerings. They stop knocking at her door. But they still come in the night. Desperate, quiet, cloaked in shame. And she still helps. Without thanks. Without question. Because that's what a midwife does. You begin to understand that knowledge in a woman's hands is a threat. That healing without permission is defiance. That knowing where the uterus sits, how it contracts, how to stop the bleeding with yarrow and faith, that is not called wisdom, it's called suspicion. You think about this while boiling willow bark for your neighbor's headache, while grinding dried fennel for your own monthly pain. You think about how every remedy is a risk, How every lesson you've learned comes with a warning. You're not just learning how to heal, you're learning how to hide. You don't tell your husband what you know. He doesn't ask. He wouldn't understand. He believes sickness is punishment, that childbirth is penance, that suffering is sacred and must be endured. You know better, but you nod when he speaks. You stir the stew. You wipe the baby's nose. And later, when he sleeps, you crush thyme into oil and rub it into your daughter's chest, whispering the healer's rhyme under your breath. You don't tell the priest either. He preaches that pain is the body's reminder of the fall, that women bleed because Eve opened her mouth. You listen with your eyes lowered and your fists clenched. You want to ask, if pain is holy, why do you get to take medicine? But you don't ask, because midwives aren't saints. They're witches, or so they say. You once saw a woman accused, not your teacher, not yet, but another, the brewer's wife. She knew too much about fever, had too many answers for a woman with no formal learning. They said she cursed the grain, that she brewed spells, not ale. You watched them drag her into the square. Her mouth was open, not in a scream, but in protest, as if she still believed she could explain. No one listened. They burned her. The flames were quick. The silence after lasted longer. You wonder sometimes if her knowledge died with her, or if it lives in the women who watched, the women who remember, the women who kept their mouths shut, but their minds open. Your teacher says the difference between a healer and a witch is who's asking the question. You believe her, because you've seen it. How the same hands that bring life into the world can be tied behind your back if the wrong man feels threatened. How the same tea that eases suffering can be called poison if it works too well. How you can save a life at dawn and be condemned by dusk, just because you didn't kneel when they told you to. So you keep learning. But now, you keep secrets too. You bury your herbs beneath the chicken coop. You memorize doses instead of writing them. You speak in metaphors. You let them believe your cures are luck, coincidence, prayer. Because women like you don't get to be brilliant. You get to be useful. Or you get to be burned. There is no third option. Not yet. You sit at the table, folding bread into your mouth, like a girl with nothing to say. The fire crackles. The stew simmers. Your husband talks. Your brother-in-law talks louder. They argue about the price of oats, the harvest, the bishop's latest decree about sin and livestock. None of it is correct. Every figure they quote is wrong. Every conclusion is backward. But you nod. You chew. You sip your soup like an obedient, empty vessel. Because you've learned. They don't want you to be right. They want you to be quiet. You used to try. Used to lean forward and offer gentle corrections, suggestions, questions. You used to say, I think it's closer to 5 dinars a sack. Or, didn't Father Bernard say the tithe would double this year? Or, but isn't the river flooding because of the moon? They didn't answer you. They stared at you. And then they laughed. One time your husband threw his spoon across the room, called you an embarrassment. Said no man wants a wife who thinks she's better than him. You weren't trying to be better. You were just trying to be accurate. But it doesn't matter. In this world, a woman with a thought is a woman with a weapon. So now you keep them hidden. Not just your thoughts. Your thinking. You've perfected the art of appearing simple. The vacant smile, the nod, the occasional blink of confusion that makes them feel clever when they explain things to you you already understand. You say, oh, and really, and I hadn't thought of that, like you mean it. But you've thought of it. You've thought of all of it. You do the math in your head before they finish the sentence. You see the lie before it fully leaves their mouth. You know when they're guessing, when they're bluffing, when they're trying to dress up superstition as wisdom. You recognize the shape of control in their tone. But they never know. Because you never let them see you think. It's safer that way. At church, you sit in the back, eyes lowered, hands folded. You recite the verses and mouth the prayers and let your mind wander. You think about the patterns in the stone floor, about how many steps from your seat to the door, about how the priest misquoted that scripture again, about the woman 3 pews ahead who hasn't spoken since the solstice. You notice everything. You just don't say it. There's a woman in the village, Margaret, who used to speak, boldly, openly. She asked too many questions, had too many opinions. She corrected the tanner once, in public, smiled too wide when she did it. Now she limps when she walks, says she fell down the stairs. You know better. So, when someone asks you a question, even one you know the answer to, you hesitate. You look to your husband. You speak softly. You couch your truth in disclaimers. I could be wrong, but maybe I misunderstood, but of course, you would know better than me. It's exhausting, but it works. They smile at you like you're harmless, like you're sweet, like you're too soft to hold any real edge. And while they smile, you remember. You record. You build castles in your head out of facts and flaws and hidden truths. You carry 100 secrets beneath your apron and no one suspects. Your mind becomes a hidden room, quiet, clean, lit by a single candle no one else can see. You visit it often. At night, when the house is dark and the only sound is your husband's breathing, you replay the conversations. You count the lies. You correct the mistakes. You map the social hierarchies and chart the rotations of power. You do what they think you can't. You think. And it saves you. One winter, the miller tries to cheat your family. Says your flour ration is short because of a clerical error. Your husband believes him. You do not. You smile. You say, I understand. You say, of course. You take the sack and weigh it in secret. You check it against last month's. You mark the difference. Then, 2 days later, you suggest to your husband, casually, over bread, that perhaps the priest should bless the millstone again, that maybe the poor yield is spiritual, that maybe other wives have noticed too. You plant the idea like a seed. You water it with feigned innocence. 3 days later, the miller comes to the door with a full sack and an apology. Your husband thinks he scared him. You nod. You smile. Because no one ever suspects the woman who's too polite, too soft, too dumb to challenge anything. You let them think that. Let them underestimate you. Because in this world, there are only 2 kinds of smart women. The ones they burn and the ones they don't see coming. You've already chosen. And every day you play your part. The soft voice, the lowered eyes, the sweet laugh. You carve out just a little more space in that hidden room of yours. That space where no man rules, where no priest judges, where your thoughts bloom like wild herbs through stone. Let them talk. Let them guess. Let them think the fire in your eyes is candlelight and not a furnace waiting for the right wind. Let them believe they're the ones in charge. Because the moment they see your mind, they'll try to break it. So you wear your silence like armor and wait. It happens by accident. You weren't trying to outshine him. You were trying to help. The cart was stuck in the mud again, 2 wheels deep in spring rot. He was shouting at the oxen, slapping their flanks like it was their fault the earth was soft. You said, quietly, if you shift the weight to the back, it might lift. He ignored you. Of course he did. So you waited until he stormed off for more rope, then did it yourself. Shifted 2 sacks of grain, levered a board beneath the wheel. The cart moved. Just a little. But enough. When he returned and found it unstuck, he blinked, then scowled. You touch my cart? You didn't lie. You just nodded. He didn't thank you. He told the butcher later that night, loudly, called it funny. Said his wife was getting clever. Might start teaching the oxen Latin, he joked, and everyone laughed. Not because it was funny, but because a man must laugh when he's embarrassed. It's the only safe exit from shame. The next day, the miller asked if you were building carts now. The week after, the blacksmith smirked and asked if you'd like to hammer iron next. At church, the priest spoke about pride in women. How Eve didn't know her place. How a woman who thinks herself equal to a man opens the door to sin. You didn't say a word, but you saw it. You saw the way their eyes lingered now, not with lust, but with suspicion, like you were carrying something sharp beneath your dress, something too heavy for a woman to bear, a secret, a scheme, a spark. He, your husband, stopped speaking to you for 2 days, then 3. Then came the silence that wasn't silent, the kind that filled the house with invisible tension, the kind that made your daughter tiptoe, the kind that made you dream of screaming just to hear something break. He finally spoke again, cold and clipped. You think you're better than me? You didn't answer, because there's no answer to that question that won't cost you something. The thing about the male mind is this. It's built like a fence around a candle, thin, protective, always afraid of wind. And when the candle flickers, when the flame of his self-worth so much as wobbles, but he will do anything to keep it lit, even if it means smothering the air around you. A man can lose a finger in the forge and be called brave, but let his pride take a scratch from a woman, and it festers. You start to hear things. She's too clever. She's always watching. She asks too many questions. I wouldn't let my wife speak like that. Probably got her nose in something she shouldn't. Too proud, that one. You can see it in her walk. You don't walk any differently. But now, they all see it. And once a man decides he feels small near you, he starts looking for ways to make you smaller. He makes jokes at your expense. Nothing brutal. Just enough to make people laugh and remind you where you stand. He corrects you in public, even when you're right, especially when you're right. He tells you to smile more. He tells you to stop interrupting when you haven't spoken. He tells the neighbor he's lucky his wife knows her place. You tell yourself, it's just words. But then come the little punishments. The stew you make goes untouched. The door locked before you return from market. The child you ask him to watch is ignored until she cries. You're not being beaten. You're being erased, quietly, efficiently, like ink scraped from parchment. You begin to wonder if they truly believe you're dangerous, or if it just feels good to say it. You start making yourself smaller again, shrinking back into the soft phrases and blank stares that used to keep you safe. But it's too late. They've smelled the smoke of your mind. They know it burns. And now, every word you speak, no matter how soft, sounds like defiance. He tells the priest you've been moody. The priest nods, says women are like horses, easier when broken and young. You nod too, because what else can you do? You tend the fire, you wash the clothes, you stroke your daughter's hair and pray she inherits your thoughts but not your tongue. You visit the healer less, you stop reading old scraps, you bury your curiosity like a body no one will look for. But still, it sits in you like a spark that won't go out. You know what they fear isn't your voice. It's your clarity. The way you see through things, the way you remember details, the way you notice when power trembles. They fear the fact that you outthought him once and could do it again. You didn't mean to provoke it, but the moment he saw your mind, he armed himself. And in this world, a wounded male ego doesn't bleed. It sharpens, and it aims. It starts with a goat, a sick one, won't eat, won't rise. The farmer swears it looked fine the night before, but now its eyes are glassy, and its ribs look sharper. He curses. His wife crosses herself. The neighbor suggests bad hay. The priest suggests something darker. By evening, your name has been spoken. You didn't touch the goat. You barely know the farmer. But 2 weeks ago, you said something odd about the weather. Something about how the clouds felt wrong. And last Sunday, you didn't kneel fast enough when the sermon reached the part about obedience. It doesn't take much. They're not looking for witches. They're looking for answers that don't cost them power. And if you've got a face they've seen thinking, really thinking, that's close enough. By morning, 3 more animals are sick. 1 child coughs blood. Someone's marriage bed runs cold. The priest says the village is under attack. And the only weapon the devil needs is a woman's mind unchained. You walk through town and they look away or stare too hard. No one speaks, not to your face, only behind doors, between prayers. The baker forgets your name. The healer closes her shutters. You knock once, twice, then stop. You've seen this before. You were 12 when the first woman burned. Old Marta, bent like a question mark, eyes too sharp, hands too steady. She never hurt anyone. She just knew things, where the bees would swarm, when the frost would come, what plants would dull pain, and which ones would end it. They called it unnatural. They dragged her to the square, built a pyre, made the children watch, said it was a lesson in purity. You remember her last look, not terrified, tired, like she'd known this was always how it would end. You thought it was an accident. It wasn't. You understand now. The burnings don't begin when women cast spells. They begin when women stop pretending to be stupid. The trials aren't about justice. They're about memory. The village remembers the way you corrected the butcher's math, the way you didn't flinch when the priest raised his voice, the way you once cured a fever with boiled weeds and didn't charge a coin. They remember, and they resent. Because in a world where power is hoarded, clarity is theft. No one ever really believes in witches, not deep down, but they believe in control. And when control starts to slip, when crops fail, when sons die, when prayers go unanswered, they need a cause, and it can't be God, and it can't be themselves. So it has to be you. You who walks alone too often. You who asks too many questions. You who heals without sacraments. You who reads without permission. You who has seen too much and stayed too calm. You hear the word for the first time late at night from your neighbor's window. Witch, spoken like a slur, a curse, a warning. And once it's said, it grows. It spreads like mold through bread. Unstoppable, familiar, comforting, even. Because if they can burn the smart one, maybe the rest of them are safe again. You try to act normal. You tend the fire. You hum. You bake something sweet and leave it at the chapel steps. But kindness is suspect now. Silence is worse. Even your smile is threatening. Rid 4. Too knowing. Too controlled. You can't win. The men call for a tribunal. No evidence needed. Just murmurs and memories, and a goat no one can save. You're brought in. Not chained. Not yet. That comes later. They ask if you've ever read a book. You say no. They ask if you know the names of herbs. You say only what your mother taught you. They ask if you dream strange dreams. You pause too long. The priest tilts his head. The scribe writes something. They ask if the devil has ever spoken to you. You laugh. You shouldn't. They don't. The crowd begins to gather. They whisper to each other, but not to you. Your body is still in the room, but your meaning has already been rewritten. You are no longer a woman. You are a container, a symbol, a warning carved from flesh and fire. No one asks what you believe. They ask where your black cat is. You don't have one. They ask why the river floods when you cry. You don't know. They ask why your neighbor's infant died the day after you walked past her door. You weren't even in the village that day. But the truth doesn't matter now. Only the story. And the story is simple. Intelligent women don't belong. Especially not when they belong to no man. Especially not when they think without permission. Especially not when they can explain what others would rather mystify. You realize, sitting there, that witchcraft is just a name they give to knowledge that doesn't kneel. And logic? Logic died the minute you outthought the wrong man. There's a cold wind when they lead you outside. No rope yet, just ceremony, just suggestion. The fire is already built. Someone spits near your feet. You stare at the wood stacked like accusation. And you wonder, not if you'll burn, but how many women will whisper your name in the years after, when they touch a fevered child's forehead or crush yarrow between their fingers, and don't say it out loud, but remember it anyway, because witches were never real. But women like you are. You arrive with frost on your boots and blood under your fingernails. It isn't yours. It never is. The gate creaks open, and they let you in without asking who you are. They already know. The rumors move faster than your feet ever could. Witch, heretic, difficult, clever, and now, none. The abbey sits on the edge of the world, or so it feels. Beyond its stone walls is a world that hunts women like you. Inside, it is quieter, warmer. But quiet doesn't mean safe. Not here. They give you a cell. One room, one cot, one cracked window, and a crucifix above your head like a warning. You sleep for 2 days straight. No one wakes you. No one scolds you. It feels like mercy. It isn't. You eat in silence. You scrub floors with your hands raw from frost. You bow when the abbess passes. You speak only when spoken to. You learn the rhythm of prayer, the cadence of penance, the shape your body must fold into to survive this new version of obedience. And then, the library. It's not large, but it breathes. Old parchment, iron ink. Scripture, mostly, but not just. There are books no one touches anymore. Books whose spines are warped with time, whose pages smell of damp thinking. You ask to read. The librarian, P, a woman with cataracts and compassion, nods. You touch knowledge again, and it feels like oxygen. You study theology, Latin, ancient philosophy, sewn through church dogma, like threads hiding in embroidery. You find words that once felt forbidden, now printed, bound, waiting. And for a moment, just a moment, you think maybe this is it, the sanctuary, the soft miracle you didn't believe in, until you ask the wrong question. It's a small one, an observation, really. You note that one passage in the Rule of St. Benedict contradicts another. You bring it up at dinner, gently. No malice, no show. The abbess doesn't speak. She stares, and you feel it. The temperature shift. Later that night, you find your place in the library missing. The book gone. The librarian's door shut. A new assignment on your cot. Scrub the privy buckets. No explanation, just correction. You learn fast. This place doesn't burn women. It drowns them in reverence. It covers your mouth with scripture. It replaces your voice with ritual. It gives you the illusion of thought, and then cuffs it to dogma. Here, you may read, but only what's approved. You may write, but only copies of what has already been said. You may think, but only in silence, only in circles, only within the stone cage of orthodoxy. They tell you this is peace. They say it's salvation, but it's just a prettier cell. You hear a novice crying one night, in the chapel, alone. Her shoulders shake. You approach her gently, offer your shawl. She flinches, not from you, from herself. She says she confessed a dream, a dream of Mary, standing barefoot in a meadow, speaking not in Latin, but in the voice of her dead mother. She told the abbess. The abbess told her she had been visited by temptation. She hasn't eaten since. You realize then that even the sacred has rules here. Even the holy must be properly labeled, properly cited, properly confessed. And you remember why you came. Not because you believed in the convent's sanctity, but because you had nowhere else to go. The world wanted your mind extinguished. The church wants it contained. You try to settle, try to find joy in the rhythm, the bells, the candlelight, the rituals that numb the ache of freedom. And sometimes you almost do. There's a comfort in knowing your role, in trading danger for structure, in being just another bowed head in a sea of bowed heads. But your mind does not forget its shape. You start writing again, not copies, but margins, notes, observations, hidden thoughts pressed between psalms and gospels like dried herbs. You do it in secret, at night, in the gaps between prayers. You read Teresa of Avila, Julian of Norwich, women who dared to see God without permission. You find their voices buried in footnotes, misquoted, softened, but still burning. You begin to dream of your own words. One morning, you're summoned. The abbess holds one of your pages. She doesn't shout. She smiles, which is worse. She says your talents are valuable, that your clarity is a gift, that it must be guided. She assigns you a mentor, a monk from the nearby monastery, older, wiser, male. He visits once a week. He praises your penmanship, questions your phrasing, corrects your conclusions, always gently, always with a smile. But each week, your work becomes less yours, each insight redirected, each original thought filed down until it fits inside his doctrine. They're not censoring you. They're polishing you. And the more polished you become, the duller your voice sounds in your own ears. You wake one morning and realize you haven't had an unmonitored thought in weeks. You've traded one fear for another, fire for silence. But the danger is the same, because whether you're burned or rewritten, the message is clear. Your mind is not your own. Not here, not anywhere. You stare at the crucifix above your bed, the same one that watched you when you first arrived. You wonder what he sees when he looks at you now. A servant, a scholar, a prisoner, a spark waiting for wind. You don't cry. You don't scream. You just sit and think, but not too loudly, not where they can hear. You don't mean to fall in love. You're not even sure it is love at first. It feels like curiosity, like recognition. He listens differently, as if your words aren't threats, but invitations. As if your thoughts don't have to shrink themselves to fit into a silence he's carved out for you. For a moment, a week, a season, it feels like maybe you've finally found the impossible thing. Someone who sees your mind and doesn't flinch. You speak plainly with him. Test the water with a question about scripture, a comment about crop rotation, a small joke that isn't entirely soft. He laughs. Not nervously, not with warning. He laughs. He says you're brilliant, that your eyes think before your mouth does, that your questions make his world clearer. You believe him. You begin to hope. He talks of marriage, and you almost hesitate, but he seems different. And you want to believe that love, real love, can be an equal thing, a shared breath, not a collar. So you say yes. And at first, it is sweet, not perfect, but soft. He listens when you speak. He asks your opinion. He watches the way you manage the household with both grace and calculation. He tells others he is proud to have a wife who reads, who reasons, who can tell the difference between flattery and truth. You want it to last, but then you disagree. just once. It's small. A question about finances, about giving alms to the abbey when the fields are failing. You point out the math, gently, with care. You show him the numbers. You offer a solution, and something in him changes. He nods, but later his tone cools. His hand lingers on your shoulder just a moment too long. Firm, not quite affectionate. You think nothing of it, at first, but it happens again. A second disagreement, then a third. Each time, something dims in him. You begin to notice how he talks about you when others are around, jokes more. She's got too much wit for her own good. Keeps the accounts better than a merchant. Maybe I'll start charging to speak with her. Everyone laughs. You laugh too, because it's safer than silence. But you feel it. The shift. Love, when wrapped around intelligence, becomes suspicion. Not yours. His. Because love, for a man raised by patriarchy, is only sweet when it's soft. When it doesn't correct him. When it doesn't outpace him. When it doesn't remind him, in the quiet moments, that you see through him. You think of the stories. All those women in town who once lit up around their husbands, and now walk a half step behind them. Eyes down, voice down, fire out. You see it coming. The moments when your brilliance is met not with awe, but with annoyance. The questions that used to enchant him now irritate. The ideas you offer at the table are now ignored, or worse, repeated back later as his own. You confront him once, not loudly, just a soft ask. Why do you seem angry when I speak? He blinks, says you're imagining things, says he loves your mind, says he tells everyone how lucky he is. But his eyes say something else. They say, don't embarrass me again. You start shrinking, not because you want to, because you're testing. Can silence fix it? Can softness bring him back? You smile more. You defer. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You fold your thoughts into smaller shapes. But the distance grows, because your silence now feels like judgment to him. He senses the space between who you are and who you pretend to be, and instead of closing the gap, he resents you for making him notice it. Love turns sour slowly. It hides behind dinners and church pews and quiet walks. It disguises itself as exhaustion, as headaches, as don't wait up, as you wouldn't understand. You do understand. Too well. You know he thought he wanted a smart wife, until he realized that a smart wife can see when he's lying, that a smart wife doesn't mistake moodiness for mystery, that a smart wife, when silenced, doesn't stop thinking. She just starts watching. You become a mirror, and he hates his reflection. One night, after a long silence, he tells you you've changed. You haven't. You've just stopped performing ignorance. You ask him if he still loves you. He says nothing, and that tells you everything. Because a man taught to dominate cannot stay in love with a woman who can't be dominated, not without tearing himself apart. You leave, eventually, not with a shout, not with a bang, with a packed satchel, a note, a quiet walk at dawn. He never chases you, but he tells everyone he let you go, that you were too much, too intense, that you thought too highly of yourself. He tells them that love needs peace. What he means is, love needs silence, and you refuse to be quiet. So he chose peace, and you chose freedom. Your body tears open, then it closes, then it bleeds. The midwife says you did well. The priest says you are now blessed. Your husband says nothing, just counts fingers and toes and nods, like this is the only thing you were ever made for. The pain is still in your bones when they hand you the child, red, wet, screaming, and call you mother. And just like that, they expect you to disappear. Because a mother isn't meant to be a person. She's meant to be a vessel, a cradle, a cook, a breast, a prayer. They think the pain will humble you, that the exhaustion will smother the questions, that your mind, stretched thin with diapers and hunger and crying that doesn't stop, will finally quiet down. They expect you to fall in line, to forget what it was like to imagine, to challenge, to ask why. You don't. You rock the baby to sleep while thinking about plague patterns. You nurse in the candlelight and remember how letters shape words and words shape reality. You stir stew and diagram social hierarchies in your head. You chop onions and rehearse arguments. You wipe spit from your shoulder and compose full treatises no one will ever read. Because motherhood fills your hands, not your mind. And your mind is still starving. You talk to the baby when no one else is around. You whisper truths they never told you. You say, the stars don't revolve around the earth. You say, God is not afraid of questions. You say, people fear what they don't control. You say, love should not bruise. You know they won't remember. Not yet. But maybe their bones will. At church, you sit with the other mothers. You smile. You nod. You do not speak much. They speak of teething and tantrums and the best way to dry cloth diapers in the winter wind. You listen. You join in. But inside, you are still you. The girl who asked why bread costs more near Easter. The girl who guessed the storm before the priest did. The girl who read by firelight and buried the evidence. Motherhood hasn't changed you. It's just given you someone to protect. Your child grows. So does the danger. One night, they ask why the sun moves. You pause. You tell them what the church says. Then, quieter, you tell them what you've seen, how the shadows stretch and shrink, how the world tilts, though no one admits it, how the truth doesn't always wear robes. They laugh, not cruelly, just freely, because they don't know yet what it costs to think aloud. You smile, but inside, you flinch. You remember the girl down the road who dared to say the priest was wrong once, and now her house is silent. You remember the baker's wife who asked too many questions about taxes and found her oven smashed. You remember your own mother's eyes the night she told you never to look too curious. You remember, and you choose your words with care. But still, you speak. Because if you don't, who will? The books are gone, the herbs watched, the old women silenced or softened or accidentally drowned. All that's left is your voice. So you wait until twilight, until the house is still, until your child is curled in your lap, and the shadows make the world feel gentler. Then you speak, not loudly, not like a rebellion, like a lullaby. You say, there are places where women speak freely. You say, there are men who listen without fear. You say, there are truths older than doctrine. You say, one day you'll have questions. Ask them anyway. And even though the child may not understand, their eyes widen, they listen. And you realize this is how it starts. Not with flames, but with whispers. They think motherhood has made you smaller. They're wrong. It's made you quieter, more patient, more strategic, more dangerous. Because now, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're planting thoughts in the next mind. A mind that hasn't yet been trained to fear itself. A mind that might carry your questions further than you ever could. Past borders, past rules, past fear. Some nights, you wonder if it's fair to pass on the fire, to teach a child to think when the world punishes thinkers. But then you look at them, and you know the real cruelty would be silence. So you speak, softly, again and again, until your child begins asking on their own. And one day, maybe not soon, maybe not in your lifetime, They'll say something that echoes something you whispered in the dark, and someone will pause, and someone will flinch, and someone will call it dangerous. And that's how you'll know your mind survived. You don't remember the exact moment you rose, only that one day they started looking at you differently, not with suspicion, with curiosity. You were a lady's maid, then a lady in waiting, then something else. The queen's hand paused on your shoulder longer than usual. A nobleman complimented your wit, not your waist. You knew when to smile, when to agree, when to hold your tongue, and when to speak so carefully it felt like lacework, delicate, invisible, sharp enough to bleed. Now, you stand behind the throne, not on it, but near enough to feel its heat. You're in the room where decisions happen, but not at the table. You pour wine for men who rule the realm and listen harder than they realize. You watch the way power speaks, through posture, silence, and who is allowed to interrupt whom. You know what happens when a woman leans too far forward. You've seen it, the glances, the murmurs, the way a question becomes defiance, the way defiance becomes danger. So you become fluent in the language of court. You master the slow blink, the calculated pause, the compliment that sounds like obedience but stings like strategy. You wear your hair in ways they approve of. You walk like your steps weigh less than your thoughts. You let the men think they're clever, and then you rearrange them like chess pieces. No one calls it power when a woman wields it without title. They call it charm, influence, seduction, manipulation. Because for a woman, rising without permission is always suspect. You're accused of ambition, but only when it becomes visible. Until then, it's called grace. The queen watches you. She sees what you're doing, not because she disapproves, because she did it first, or tried to, or still does, in the cracks of her reign. You catch her eyes across the hall as her husband slurs through another toast. You see the flicker of exhaustion, the flinch no one else notices. You know the look, the warning, be careful. They'll love you until they realize they fear you. You start to feel the edges of your rise. The ladies whisper when you enter. The men lower their voices. The steward misplaces your letters. The bishop questions your devotion. You haven't done anything wrong. But wrongness, for a woman near power, doesn't need proof. It only needs discomfort. And you make them uncomfortable. You suggest a new method for storing grain, a better way to count tax, a more efficient system for correspondence. They praise the ideas when spoken by someone else. One lord calls your thoughts refreshing, then proposes to keep you close so he can hear more of them. He means his bed. You decline. He frowns. The next week, your name is left off the list for the queen's procession. A mistake, they say. You nod, smile, apologize for any confusion you may have caused by existing too visibly. The queen calls you later, privately. She asks how much you want. You don't answer, because you're not sure. You didn't plan this, not exactly. But now that you're here, breathing the same air as the architects of kingdoms, it's hard to go back to scrubbing floors and swallowing ideas. So you stay. You dress carefully. Speak sparingly. Play the game as though you've never heard of it. But inside, you're mapping the board. You learn that women at court are expected to be one of two things: ornaments or schemers. Anything else makes the men nervous. A woman who speaks plainly, she's rude. A woman who reads treaties, dangerous. A woman who smiles without begging, arrogant. A woman who holds a secret and never tells, witch. So you let them choose which version of you they prefer. And while they argue about it, you keep rising. One day, a young girl enters court. She's like you were once, too bright-eyed, too honest, She says things she shouldn't say, notices things she shouldn't notice. They mock her behind her back, laugh at her questions. You pull her aside, not to warn her off, to teach her how to last. You tell her, never ask the question in public. Plant it. Let it grow in their heads until they think it was theirs all along. You tell her, they'll call you clever, then punish you for it. Smile anyway. You tell her, intelligence in a woman is never neutral. It's either a tool or a threat. You decide which. And maybe, just maybe, she'll rise too. You think you're safe for a while. You've survived the rumors, the innuendo, the half invitations. You've dodged proposals, flirted with power, aligned yourself with the queen. You've played the long game. But one day, a nobleman dies. And his last confession? He names you, says you whispered treason. It's a lie. But lies in court don't need legs. They just need lips. You're summoned, not arrested, just questioned. You answer with grace, with silence, with the kind of restraint that only comes from years of walking tightropes. And when they dismiss you, for now, you feel the ground shifting beneath you. Because rising as a woman is not like climbing a ladder. It's like skating across a frozen lake. Beautiful, powerful, and always, always one crack away from drowning. But still, you don't stop. You can't. You've seen too much, learned too much, come too far. You are no one's ornament. You are not a schemer. You are what they never prepared for. An equal, who stayed long enough to become inevitable. It starts with a compliment. You're sharp, aren't you? He says it with a smile, wine on his breath, elbow resting a little too casually on the table between you. He means it to flatter, or at least to amuse. Like you're a clever dog who's learned a new trick. You nod politely. You know better than to agree out loud. Because sharp women become blades in stories like these. And blades don't stay in the sheath for long. You learn quickly that in this world, intelligence in a woman is not a virtue. It's a liability with a prettier name. Clever. Ambitious. Too quick to speak. They don't call it wisdom. They call it attitude. They don't call it perception. They call it gossip. They don't call it strategy. They call it scheming. You don't need to lie to be labeled dangerous. You just need to notice things out loud. You ask why the taxes are higher this year when the harvest was stronger. You ask why the magistrate's son has a new cloak when the poor have no bread. You ask why the bishop's sermons always seem to defend the same four men. You ask. That's enough. It begins as murmurs. She's got a sharp tongue, too many opinions, always watching. The same men who once sought your counsel now call you cunning. The same women who once confided in you now cross themselves when you pass. They don't need proof. They just need to agree. You're not accused of a crime. Not yet. Just a mood, an energy, a tone. She makes people uncomfortable. As if discomfort is a sin, your thoughts are no longer thoughts. They're motives, hidden agendas, proof of your corruption. You're no longer insightful. You're conniving. A puppet master. A seductress. A problem. You laugh at a joke that isn't funny, and they say you're mocking. You offer a correction, and they say you're undermining. You stay silent, and they say you're plotting. Truth doesn't matter anymore. Only the story does. And the story they're telling doesn't have room for a woman who knows too much. So they rewrite you. They take your ideas and reassign them to others. They quote you, but not by name. They lift your words and use them to win arguments you weren't even invited to. And when you object, when you say, "That was mine," they smile and say, "She's jealous." You stop offering, not because you've run out of thoughts, but because you've seen what happens to women who think in public. They are studied like puzzles, then dismissed like threats. It's not what you say. It's the fact that you know what you're saying. You remember the healer from your village, the one who used to name herbs in 3 languages, the one who cured the baker's son with nothing but crushed root and boiling water, the one who bled knowledge from her hands. She was too good, too right. So they called her a witch, burned her like fire could destroy what she knew. You remember how long the smell stayed in your clothes. Now they don't burn women like that. Not in court, not in daylight. They just erase you. Not with fire, with ridicule. You're too proud, too loud, too strange, too something. And in their mouths, too much becomes evil. You see it happen in real time. A man with less knowledge speaks over you and is called decisive. A woman with the same thought says it a breath later and is called difficult. So you play quieter. For a time, you let them underestimate you. You nod more, you smile more. You act like the intelligence was never there to begin with. Just a glimmer, just a girl's mistake. But they don't believe you. Because once a woman has shown her mind, they never let her forget it. You're not a woman anymore. You're a question mark. And men do not like loose ends. So they wrap you in rumors, bind you in narratives you didn't write. She's ambitious. She's climbing. She's dangerous. They forget how many fires you've put out, how many things you've held together, how many wrongs you quietly made right without ever asking for credit. Or maybe they don't forget. Maybe that's exactly why they fear you. Because intelligence with no leash becomes threat, and threat must be punished. So they rebrand your foresight as betrayal, your discipline as coldness, your plans as traps, your silence as seduction, your clarity as cruelty. They say, she's always thinking, and they mean it as a warning. But you do keep thinking. Because it's the only thing they haven't taken. Because you've learned that even if they brand your mind as evil, they cannot unmake it. Because even if they reduce you to a whisper, you still know the shape of thunder. Because truth, real truth, doesn't go out when they blow on it. It hides. It waits. It watches. Just like you. You didn't ask for influence. It found you slowly, like a rumor at first. One man asked what you thought about the grain levy. Another mentioned that your words had made him reconsider the priest's sermon. A third told you, in confidence, that he had followed your suggestion at council and come out looking brilliant. He grinned as if you should be proud of him. And maybe you were, at first, because it felt good to be heard, to be useful, to be something more than silent. But soon, it changes. They keep asking, but now they don't meet your eyes. They shift in their seats. They phrase it differently. Not, what do you think? But, what would a woman say? Not, you were right, but, strange. It turned out just like you guessed. And then, after they take your ideas and polish them into speeches and laws and declarations of great wisdom, they avoid you. You walk into the room, and the temperature drops. You feel it. A pause in conversation. A flick of the eyes. A cough meant to fill a silence that wasn't there before you entered. Because they know what you know, and they hate that they needed it. A woman who influences quietly, without sword or seal or divine appointment, is worse than a rebel. She's unnatural, because they can't stop you, can't discredit you without confirming your power, can't accuse you of manipulation without admitting they were manipulable. So they try something subtler. They start calling it luck. She has good instincts. She's intuitive. She has a presence. But never mind. Not strategy, not knowledge, not reason, because those belong to them. And if you have them, something must be off. So they joke about you. Say you've got magic, that your words are spells, that men forget themselves around you. They laugh when they say it, but they're not joking. They're terrified, because you've done what the order of things said you couldn't. You've made men listen, without marrying them, birthing them, or kneeling before them. And now they don't know what to do with you. They can't promote you. That would be obscene. They can't banish you. That would be suspicious. They can't ignore you. You're already in their heads. So they try to shame you instead. They say you speak too much, laugh too freely, sit too confidently. They say your influence is corrupting, that you whisper too often in corners, that men have lost their edge since you arrived. They imply without saying that you're the root, the reason things feel different now, the reason the old men are nervous, the reason the young men are questioning, the reason authority no longer feels untouchable. You notice the shift. The new girls in court are warned about you. Watch her. She plays a longer game. She gets inside your thoughts. They speak like you're poison, not because you are, but because your presence proves they've built a world too fragile to survive truth spoken in a woman's voice. They call you dangerous, and you are, not because you wield a blade, not because you shout or curse or challenge the king himself, but because you've shown the cracks, because your influence doesn't look like theirs, because when you speak, people rethink everything they've built. Even the queen is cautious now. You've risen too close. You're no longer a pet. You're not decoration. You're not novelty. You're precedent. And that terrifies them more than any prophecy. You try to dim it, sometimes. For safety, you try to speak less or speak softer. You feign ignorance. You ask questions you already know the answers to. You let them explain things to you that you taught them last year. But it's too late. You've already changed the room. They can't go back to pretending women are vessels of silence once they've sipped from your mind. So they build a new story around you. One where you are clever, but calculating. Helpful, but self-serving. Wise, but only for your gain. They take your clarity and smear it with suspicion. And now, every idea you offer comes wrapped in doubt. Not because it's wrong, because it's yours. You walk through the court and they bow, but it's not respect. Not anymore. It's caution. They've seen what happens when a woman speaks clearly and others listen. They've seen what happens when influence doesn't require inheritance. You are not their equal. You are their mirror, and they don't like what they see. So you keep walking, not because you're welcome, not because it's safe, but because you have something they never expected to last. Voice that echoes, and power that didn't ask permission. You die on a Thursday. It's raining, not poetically, just cold, sloppy, indifferent. There's no crowd unless the executioner calls one. No procession unless your name was loud enough to make men tremble. But whether it's the fire or the fever, the gallows or the gut wound, the end is the same. You close your eyes and vanish. Not your thoughts, not your mind. You, the body that once carried defiance, the mouth that asked questions, the hands that knew herbs and maps and languages and truths too wild to sit still. You die, and they sigh, some with relief, some with sadness, some with that practiced shrug men wear, when something they couldn't control finally stops speaking. But death is not the end, not for women like you, because then they write. Not books, not monuments, chronicles, recordings without fingerprints, language scraped clean of motive. They don't tell the truth. They tell the version that sleeps well in kings' beds. And you become a rumor in their ink. They don't mention how often your advice averted famine, how your calculations steadied bridges, how your ideas restructured trade, how your mind, your inconvenient, radiant, female mind, left its fingerprints on policies No man could untangle from his own. Instead, they write that you were unstable, beautiful but volatile, sharp-tongued, ungrateful, proud, too curious for your station, too opinionated for your gender, too educated for your salvation. They call you something small, a seductress, a temptress, a schemer, or worse, a witch. Because the world cannot stomach a woman who thought too deeply without also implying she summoned something unnatural. No one wants to admit you outwitted them. They'd rather say you hexed them. So, they erase the nuance, the long nights, the whispered questions, the sleepless study, and they condense you to a cautionary tale. A warning. They say you laughed too much, spoke too boldly, wore red. They say men fell to ruin after speaking with you, that the crops died when you passed, that your womb held secrets, that your tongue held curses. They never say, she was right. They say, she was trouble. And if your name survives, it won't belong to you anymore. It will belong to their story. You will be remembered by the shape of your nose, by the curve of your lips in a single portrait, by the phrase, suspected of heresy, carved beside your burial, by the single sentence, executed for unnatural knowledge. And little girls with bright eyes and dangerous minds will hear your name in whispers. They'll be told to avoid your mistakes, to not read so much, to not speak when not asked, to not ask what cannot be answered by Scripture. They won't say your name with reverence. They'll say it with warning. And maybe, in some future century, someone will try to resurrect you. A scholar, a scribe, a woman with a hunger that feels familiar. She'll find scraps, a letter you once hid inside the spine of a psalm book, a coded recipe, a list of names written backwards, tucked beneath floorboards. And she'll know, she'll feel it in her bones. You were more than the ending they gave you. But for now, all that's left is silence. Because when a woman dies with too much wisdom, they bury her twice. Once in the earth, and once in the version they tell. So your tomb bears no titles, no accolades, just a birth year, and a death, and a single word. Unmarried, as if that's the measure. As if what you didn't belong to matters more than what you built. As if the world didn't shape itself, ever so slightly, around the tremble of your voice. But here's the thing, they'll never be able to erase. Your thoughts didn't die when you did. They scattered, carried in the ears of the girls you taught to question, written on the margins of pages passed in secret, muttered by midwives, memorized by daughters, echoed by those who watched you burn and thought, she wasn't wrong. Because even when they reduce you to ash or absence, you don't disappear. You haunt. And that is something they never knew how to contain. It begins with a whisper, not from the pulpit, not from the scrolls in the monastery library, not from any man in velvet sleeves or iron rings, from the mouths of girls, in kitchens, in fields, in alleys behind bakeries where ash clings to skirts and the air smells like burnt flour and questions no one's allowed to ask. She knew things, one of them says. The others look around, no priest in sight, no mother within earshot. So the youngest dares to answer. My grandmother said she helped deliver her baby sister. When the real midwife got sick, she saved them both. They nod, eyes wide, as if the mention of your name could summon frost or thunder or, worse, awareness. No one says your full name anymore. That's long been scraped from record and memory and stone. But your story, that never died, it just went underground. And now it lives in firelight, in half-laughed rumors, in the space between what they were taught and what they know in their bones. She wasn't like the others, they say, she read. She didn't kneel. She made a man cry just by telling the truth. The older women pretend not to hear, or if they do, they hush it away with a quick crossing of the chest. Don't speak like that, They scold. She was dangerous. But danger, in the mouth of a girl who's been told all her life to shrink, sounds suspiciously like freedom. So the stories keep spreading. You're in the fabric now, woven into lullabies and recipes, and the way a woman glances up when the priest misquotes the Psalms. They say you cured a merchant's wife with nothing but fennel and prayer. They say you translated scripture by moonlight. They say you told a baron he'd go mad if he didn't listen to the peasant women. And he did. They don't always get the details right. But that's not the point. Because history isn't what survives in books. It's what survives in murmurs. And your murmur has teeth. One girl wears a ribbon around her neck and calls it her charm of cleverness. She says it belonged to you. It didn't. But the belief makes her braver. Another hides her journal behind the woodpile. She fills it with questions, sketches of the moon, half-written arguments. She's never seen your face, but she draws one anyway. Angular, kind, severe. Because somewhere inside, she knows. Knows there was a woman once who asked too many questions and survived long enough to plant a few answers. And maybe that's enough. The priest preaches about Eve, about obedience, about the sanctity of silence. He warns about the corruption of female pride, about heresy that starts in the womb. His voice echoes off stone, but it doesn't land the way it used to. Because every time he says, Eve, the girls think you. And the word that once meant sin now means resistance. They still burn witches. Sometimes. But it's rarer now. And harder. Because more women know the stories. And more men are tired of being afraid of minds that don't look like theirs. And sometimes, when the crowd gathers, someone remembers that time you cured the mayor's child. Or the rumor about you predicting the flood. Or the way the stars moved exactly the way you said they would. And they hesitate. Sometimes hesitation is all it takes. You're still not in the books. They still call the council members wise, the bishops holy, the scribes learned. But under their breath, in kitchens and cellars and the folds of laundry passed between mothers and daughters, you are something bigger than any of them. Not holy, not wicked, just possible. You are the possibility that a woman could know something and not apologize for it. That a woman could lead without raising her voice. That a woman could burn and still be remembered not as ash, but as blueprint. They say you walked into court with your head high. That you out-argued 2 monks before breakfast. That you made men believe in futures they couldn't imagine. One day, a girl will ask, why did they fear her so much? And the answer won't come from a priest or a page. It'll come from another girl, whispered in the dark, because she didn't ask for permission, because she saw too much, because she was free. And just like that, you will live again, not in form, but in fire, the kind that doesn't burn things down, but lights the way. They never figured out what to do with you. They couldn't marry you off, not easily. You were too opinionated, too restless, too unwilling to drape yourself in obedience just to make a man feel tall. You wouldn't flatter stupidity. You wouldn't lie for comfort. You wouldn't break yourself into pieces to fit into a box you never asked to be in. So they tried other things. They called you strange, arrogant, unwomanly. They tried to shame you back into silence, into softness, into something they could predict and control. But you kept thinking, kept asking, kept peeling back the lies they built their lives on. You never screamed. You didn't need to. Your mind was louder than any shout. That's what made them panic. Not your words, but your refusal to make yourself smaller. They tried to make an example out of you, with rumors, with exile, with fire, depending on the century, depending on how scared they were. Because that's what it always came down to. Fear. Not hate, not jealousy. Fear. Fear of what it meant that you existed. Fear of what it meant that you walked into rooms and rearranged the air just by thinking too clearly. Fear that you didn't need them, not their approval, not their structure, not their permission. Fear that you could walk away from power because you weren't addicted to it. You were not the kind of woman they built laws for. You couldn't be inherited like land, or silenced like a servant, or broken like a horse. You could not be owned. And that is what they couldn't forgive. They branded you in stories, twisted you into caution, reduced you to firewood and fable, and still, you survived them. Not in name, they saw to that. Not in portrait. Those were painted over. Not in grave. No one dares mark it. But in tension. In the way a man stammers when a girl challenges him with too much clarity. In the way women glance at each other during sermons, silently confirming what they both know and dare not say aloud. In the way a girl learns to write her thoughts backward in the margins of the book of Psalms, just in case. You live in the discomfort. You live in the half-remembered lessons. You live in every pause before a punishment, every second guess before a sentence, every uneasy recognition that something they killed is still breathing in the walls. They burned your body, but they couldn't burn your refusal. They couldn't torch the way you never bowed. They couldn't kill the way your eyes lingered too long on the stars. Not in longing, but in understanding. They thought power was something they could hand down like a sword or a title. They never imagined it could simply exist in a woman who owed them nothing. Your power wasn't borrowed. It wasn't bought. It wasn't gifted. It was forged. In hunger, in thought, in quiet rebellion. You didn't need to rule. You didn't need to be adored. You just needed to be yours. And that was more than they could stand. Because they could conquer countries, but not a woman who wouldn't play the game. So they called you cursed, possessed, wild. Not because you were wrong, but because you were right, without apology. And long after your voice faded, long after the hearths grew cold and the pages yellowed, you remained. Not as saint, not as queen, as interruption, as proof, as memory they can't quite scrub out. Even now, they flinch at women who think too much, who speak too boldly, who stare too long and say too little, and make men question the rules they were never brave enough to rewrite. You were feared because you couldn't be used, because you couldn't be softened into a servant or sharpened into a weapon for someone else's war, because you chose your own thoughts over their safety, and in doing so, you made yourself unforgettable.